Hi, it's Wayne O'Keefe, and a lot of people have asked me about keeping bait that you can manufacture or grow yourself. Now, one of the things that I like to do is to always have a ready supply of worms. So if you buy them, it can cost you sort of $8 for a container of worms, and yet it's so easy just to have worms on supply all the time. Now, what I've got here behind me is this brick-made worm farm. You can buy plastic worm farms, which are good. They work okay, but what I found is that the problem with them is that they're plastic and they're above ground. So if the atmosphere is really hot, the worms have got nowhere to escape, and therefore if it gets really hot, then usually they die. With this type of container, this is directly on the ground, which means that should it get really hot, then the worms have somewhere to escape to, so they basically just go back into the ground. But the thing is, they don't take off; they stay where the food is. So there's in this farm, all I'm doing is on top here I have a couple of tiles. You lift those, and basically just all the household scraps, food scraps, as in vegetable scraps, are just put there, and the worms will stay under there sort of consuming that food. If it gets hot, of course they go down, but they will always be near that, especially when it's cool, so that they've got something to feed on. I'll just show you how I've made it. It's really simple. The one thing I have done though is, this is a bit of a utility area in our backyard. So I've got my bins to one side, I've got a garden shed. This doesn't get much sun. It gets some sun in the afternoon, but not for very long. And that's one of the things you want to do, is try and keep your a worm farm in an area that doesn't get too much sun, because even this, if it gets too hot for too long, the worms will have to go deep. But the great thing is, of course, that no matter how hot it gets, they've got somewhere to escape to. So I'll just show you what I've done with this, how easy it is to make, and then you can always have a ready supply of worms. So when I go fishing, I always like to have a number of different types of bait. Worms is always one of them if I'm doing freshwater fishing, or even in the estuaries. I use them when I'm chasing bream and mullet and things like that. So it's well worth having them.
So this is the setup that I've got. It's just a brick container. These are bricks that I salvaged from another structure we had in the backyard. I think it might have been an old barbecue, and I've just got a couple of tiles on top. So all you're ever doing is taking the tiles off. The next thing I do is I always have a piece of carpet over the top. What that does is that keeps the moisture in, so the worms have got somewhere moist to stay. So I usually wet this, especially in the hot weather. Then of course, as you can see here, I've got all of the scraps, the garden scraps in there, and you can see this is actually built up above ground level. Now I started this slightly below ground level, and yet over time that has built up just because of all of the vegetable waste that I've got there, but also the worms have consumed this and turned it into castings. Now if you have a look at this, what we have here is there's worms throughout everywhere in here, and it's just a matter of coming, when I'm going fishing, is just going and pulling these things out, going fishing with them. I usually return them if I've got some left after fishing, but I can have hundreds upon hundreds, so there's always worms for my fishing. And it's a great way of always having a ready supply of bait with you. And this goes all year round. They certainly get a lot more active in summer, and they breed a lot more and the numbers go up, but even in winter they're always there. The other thing is, this here that looks like soil is actually not. This is worm castings, so it's effectively their worm poop, if you like. That is also a good burley. It basically smells very heavily of the worms already. So one thing I do is I also take a container. When I take the container of worms, I use that and sometimes put it into my burley. I might have breadcrumbs, but I'll put that in as well, and that actually sends off a very strong smell of worm into the water. So that is a valuable asset as far as burley and attracting fish is concerned. So look, it's really worth doing. As you can see, this is only a couple of bricks deep, one brick wide, and a couple of bricks high. Really simple. I haven't cemented this or anything like that. I've just pushed them together. If you had normal house bricks, which are smaller than this, you can see that you could put this in anywhere in your house, and it's very, very simple to keep, and you'll always have bait. And that's a great advantage when you if you're going to go fishing on the spur of the moment and you can't get access to bait, you can't buy it, you'll always have it on hand. So it's worth having one of these things in the shade. You'll always have that, you'll always have the bait, but also it helps you to recycle food, which means that you're giving up on waste. I think it's worthwhile.
Well, I don't know if you can see that there, but that's just a worm mass. I just took a scoop of soil out of, or the castings out of that worm farm there, and immediately got a heap of worms. So it's really worthwhile. They're always, you've got an endless supply, plenty of worms, plenty of lively worms. So if I'm going after trout, redfin, cod, Australian natives, carp, anything, pretty much these things will work. So it's worth growing your own worms.